I built my first video game demo in just under 300 hours without knowing how to code, meaning no tutorials and no requirement to learn code at all. All I did was use AI and have patience. Here's how. So I want to start by saying that I have tons of respect for game developers who spend thousands of hours or tons of hours putting together and learning code. However, I believe that the better approach here for a lot of people will be using AI to do a lot of this. So, first thing I will say is when I looked at the idea of making my own video game, originally it was looking down the coding route. It was looking and going, okay, well, I might want to learn how to code, and I spent a few weeks learning and looking at some tutorials, but eventually I gave up. Then at June of this year, so June 2025, I thought, right, well, it was at a point in my life where I basically got rid of my business, my LinkedIn lead generation business, which I'd spent 2.5 years on. And I figured, right, what's the next thing I should do? And for me, it looked at, well, what if I could make my own video game? But this time I thought, well, I've got lots of experience with AI now, so why don't I try and make my own video game using AI? Because I'd done code with sort of things like AI to make automations before. And within the next sort of about 40 hours of actually, doing AI game development, I was able to make my very first ugly-looking combat scene, in which I realized, what could I do more? And obviously, 300 hours later, or just under 300 hours later, I was then able to make my first game demo, which is now officially out on Steam. Now, for reference, what AI did for me. AI made all the code for me, it made all the debugs for the code, and it fixed all the errors which I basically had. And it also made me all the images for the game, as well as all the videos for the game and the trailer. So this sounds all very good, and don't get me wrong, it's definitely a lot easier and cuts down on probably like 60 to 70% of production time that you would spend if you were learning to code. However, it is still difficult to some degree. Obviously not as difficult as learning how to code and going through all that, but it's still difficult. And the part of it is because you need quite a lot of patience. And what I mean by that is that's not just necessarily for game development, but the fact is that you're relying on AI entirely for all the code, for all the images, for everything. But the code is the more trickier part, because if an error pops up, quite frankly, when an error pops up for me, I don't know what it means, or at least I don't know what's wrong in the code a lot of the time. So I need to copy and paste the error to the AI, and I also need to give it the relevant scripts so that it can figure out what's going on, and then I'll ask it to update the relevant scripts so that we get through the error. So it is a bit of a, I guess, in the dark approach in comparison to when you're learning to code. Obviously, you're going to be able to build up a general understanding of how different things are going to work. So here's pretty much the process that I would follow. The first thing I did, and the first thing I'd recommend, is just brainstorm with AI the type of game you want to make. For reference, keep this 2D, as making images in 3D is not really going to work at this moment. So figure out what 2D game that you want to make. For me, it was trying to make a strategy, story-rich game similar to something, or at least inspired by something like Heads Will Roll Reforged, and going from there. So effectively like a turn-based strategy game with story as well. And I sort of brainstormed that a lot in terms of what I wanted that to look like, a very broad idea of the story, and that was that. The second thing is I then went and looked to play around and try and figure out what art style I wanted to use for the game. This changed various times throughout making the game, and I probably changed it 3 or 4 times during the process of making the game, which made things a lot more difficult with I had to go back and re-update certain images and characters. So I'd really focus on trying to figure out, right, what art style do you want for the game, and try and make that with AI. I'd recommend using, I mean, at the moment I use ChatGPT. If you've got a free account for ChatGPT, you should be able to make maybe 2 images, perhaps like a day or every 2 days. But try and make it visually and get something where you can go, yeah, this is what I want, because that's going to save you a lot of time in the future. And then the third thing is once you've sort of got an idea for what you want the game to effectively be and somewhat look like in terms of the art, then I want you to try and make some small snippet. Now, for me, it took me about 40 to 50 hours to basically put together a very ugly looking but working combat scene where I could attack, defend, use an item, and health and stuff went, and you could kill the enemy and such. So that worked, and when I was able to make that, then I realized, right, what more is possible? And that's when things led on, and obviously I was able to expand on that. But the thing is, like with my journey especially, it wasn't straightforward, right? Like I changed a few things quite a bit at the time, the story changed a bit, but generally speaking, I just sort of evolved with what I was doing as things happened. And a lot of it for me was trying to just enjoy the process. It was trying to just, have a bit of fun with it. If errors came up, instead of getting frustrated, I might just try and laugh it off and figure out what else, is trying to, cause issues for me or such like that. And that's really important because patience is probably the most important thing here. And what I like about just using AI is that all of a sudden, you're not having to learn all of this code. You can outsource it all to AI, and you can just focus on the smaller bits, the more enjoyable bits. Now, you might be watching this figuring out, well, is that even possible for you? Can you even do it? And again, I think what really matters here is a few things and a few rules that I just want to give you if you're going to go down this route. The most important thing I want to say is that AI is only as good as the context you give it. That's quite simple. Let me say it again. AI is only as good as the context you give it. If you are trying to do something with AI, if you're trying to make a bit of code or you're trying to describe any situation, if you don't give it enough context or any context, it's not, the margin for error is going to be far higher. If I have an error that pops up at the bottom in Unity, I'm going to copy and paste the error or multiple of them into the AI. I'm then also going to see what scripts it's referring to, or perhaps what other script that it might need for context. I'll copy and paste it all. That'll be a lot to copy and paste. But then from there, it can look at all of the context and it can figure out what the best next thing to do is. That's really key. If you're not going to give it the context, then don't, complain and have a huge issue when you realize that it's gone off and trying to do all these different things, even though you have this before. And, never just assume that the AI is always going to remember. For me, like I'm more than happy to copy and paste the same script I have over and over if it means that it just knows and it's got the fully updated script from there. Because sometimes I'll try and update something to have a extra feature in it or something I want, and the lines of code, like let's say for example the script might be 300 lines of code, it might then go to 180, and then I'm like, well, that's not right. And so I'll then give it, and then I'll undo that. I'll give it my current script. I'll say, can you fully update this? And all of a sudden it then gives me a code or script with 360 lines, meaning it's now just added to it, and that's fine. So that's what's really important. The other thing as well is that, yes, you're going to make errors, and patience is just a really big thing on this. It really is. And I think part of it is like, look, if you enjoy playing video games, if you enjoy the idea of making a game, you're going to find this a lot easier, right? You're going to find this a lot easier to go and do. And I'd make sure that if you're going to get into this for the right reasons as well. But generally, this is pretty much the approach that I use. Now, I'm happy to go and delve a bit deeper onto this topic, and I do have a few other videos that delve into a bit more as to how to make images for your game, and even maybe a few bits with the coding as well. But generally speaking, try and focus on this. Brainstorm a game idea, play around until you find an art style you're happy with, and then focus on making a first game snippet. Focus on making something that works first before you then go and try and polish it. That way you can continuously just build on things and then go as you go. So let me know your thoughts on this, and I'll chat soon.